Nish Dubashia. Dubashia is a British author, philosopher, and mathematician. I guess I'm speaking here. Recognized for his exploration of the intersection between spirituality, science, and philosophy. He's the author of The Unity of Everything, which synthesizes Eastern spirituality with Western scientific thought. He's the creator of the Daimond Model, a conceptual framework endorsed by physicist David Bohm. Nish's work presented at venues like MIT's Global Forum and UNESCO World Philosophy Day emphasizes interconnectedness, nonviolence, and human development, offering accessible insights into the evolution of consciousness and the nature of reality. Welcome, Nish Dubashia.
Thank you all very much for inviting me to speak today. So I'm going to be speaking on what has come to be known as the Daimond Model, which looks at the notion of wholeness and fragmentation and their relationship in the world and in different areas. And then we'll be looking at how that applies to what we're all exploring here, which is nature, veganism, sustainability. So I'll begin by saying 30 seconds about myself. So I'm a trained mathematician from the University of Warwick, worked as a software engineer for several decades. I've written 3 books. My focus is mostly the intersection of science, philosophy, spirituality. And I've had the privilege of speaking at 9 international conferences on the Daimond Model and related subjects. I'm a faculty member of an international training organization called the Collective Edge, and we provide courses in self-development, helping people to move to a more holistic understanding of nature and of reality. And I'm also the co-founder of a similar organization called Evolving Nexus with my work partner, Marie Murta. And if you're interested in exploring more about my work, that's my website, integraldream.com. So the Daimond Model is trying to answer a few basic fundamental questions about nature and about reality. So very quickly, the first question it asks is, what is actually the nature of a reality? How does wholeness and multiplicity coexist? Is the world fundamentally one, many? And how does this manyness or fragmentation affect our perception of existence? The second main question we'll be looking at, or that the Daimond Model tries to answer, is what is the relationship between subject and object? What is the relationship between my sense of self and the world that I see out there? And how are my identities formed and perceived? And what is non-duality? Is there a non-duality that can help us to have a deeper understanding of the interconnectedness of reality? And finally, what is the process of creation and evolution? So this question looks at, how do phenomena arise? How do they evolve over time? What are the mechanisms behind their transformation? What is the interplay between unity and diversity? So these are the questions I've been working on with my colleagues for a long time now. And we tried to come up with the simplest model that we could that would address these as simply as possible, but also as comprehensively as possible. And what we came up with was what has come to be known as the Daimond Model. So, I'll take you through the Daimond Model one element at a time and give a brief explanation of what each of these elements actually mean and signify. And you can actually see there, I hope, why it's called the Daimond Model, because the middle part, which is the key part of the model, sort of looks a little bit suspiciously like a diamond. So the first element of the Daimond Model, hopefully you can see there at the bottom, is what we call multiplicity. So multiplicity is basically this world of many different things, apparently many different things, in which we live. This is the normal universe of space-time in 3 dimensions, 4 dimensions, the world of many different things. But most philosophies, modern science, modern physics, spiritual traditions now as well, tell us that there is a realm of wholeness underlying this multiplicity, that this multiplicity is in some sense a manifestation of a deeper wholeness, a deeper oneness. There is an interconnection, a oneness that lies behind this realm of multiplicity in which we live. And what is the mechanism whereby that wholeness becomes multiplicity? Well, it takes place, the Daimond model suggests, primarily in our perception, because we create a hard distinction in our perception and experience between subject and object, between what we see as the self and what we see as the other. And that distinction we make that creates the sense of self between subject and object, in a sense, is the first multiplicity. So the one, quoting ancient Chinese spiritual traditions, the one in wholeness becomes the two, subject-object, which then becomes the many, multiplicity. That's the basic fundamental diamond, and you'll see that this shows up all over the place. It's actually quite surprising and amazing how often this shows up everywhere. And we can also see that this gives us some basis for understanding specific problems and putting into place specific action plans for dealing with particular problems. Now, there's two other elements here. If we take multiplicity too far in our perception and lose sight of that underlying wholeness, we will fall into what we call here fragmentation. Here, parts, valid parts that we break up in our understanding of the world become fragments, divorced from that underlying wholeness. And most of the problems we see in the world, including the problems we're talking about at this conference, come from fragmentation, from seeing things as radically different from each other when they're not really, and from failing to see this interconnection that lies behind everything. And ultimately, wholeness and multiplicity aren't even radically different. They're also part of an even bigger wholeness that we call non-duality, which you can see at the top there. Now, that basic process whereby wholeness manifests as multiplicity, the one becomes the many, that interconnected wholeness becomes this world of multiplicity in our perception. We refer to that as the process of creation. And that process that we seem to so desperately need now, which is to go back and rediscover that wholeness, we refer to here as the process of evolution. So that's the Daimond model very, very quickly. 8 words, basically, that summarize, we believe, a basic fractal that we can see at all scales of our existence. We can see it universally in the life of human beings, the history of human beings, even the architecture of each moment. And in case you think this is just some, and I thought that a long time, that this is just some sort of random model that I've put together, I'm going to very quickly, and I don't have time to go into detail, but very quickly show you how this diamond actually shows up in science, how it shows up in philosophy, how it shows up in spirituality. This really does seem to be a very universal pattern that shows up all over the place. So this is the physics, modern physics of David Bohm, who worked with Einstein, a very, very significant theoretical physicist. And you can see here, he refers to this world of multiplicity there as the explicate order, 2 lines up from the bottom. And that comes out of what he called the implicate order, which is clearly implied by modern physics, by quantum physics, by mathematics, which is the underlying wholeness. And that fundamental split, we can see that in mind and matter. When we lose sight of the explicate order, we fall into fragmentation. Same kind of pattern, that diamond pattern we saw earlier. An example from Western philosophy, from Plato. The underlying wholeness here are the realm of forms. The world of appearances is the multiplicity. And when we lose sight of that underlying wholeness, then the world of appearances fails to adequately reflect the realm of forms, which causes all kinds of problems in the world. And finally, we can see examples of this diamond in the Eastern traditions, Eastern spirituality, Hindu, Buddhist, Taoist. And here, the world of multiplicity is the world of form, which are referred to there by various names across the traditions. The underlying oneness is the realm of the formless, out of which form emerges. That fundamental split, which is at the root of, can be at the root of our problems, is that split between the subject and the object, which is spoken of in different ways in the traditions. And what we need, you can see on the right, there is a process of evolution to rediscover that wholeness and multiplicity. When we lose sight of that, we fall into various forms of delusion, which also are referred to there by different names in the traditions. You may have heard of Maya, which is the realm of illusion. And we do really live in a realm of illusion when we lose sight of that underlying oneness, that underlying formlessness. And that's going to be my suggestion, that that's at the root of many of the problems that we see in the world. So let's see if we can apply this diamond now in a much more broad sense to nature, because I think that's the bigger context of what we're talking about here, our relationship with nature. So let's see what kind of diamond shows up here in the world of nature. So the world of multiplicity here, I'm suggesting this is basically the world of diversity that we can see around us. Diversity of ecosystems, of life forms, of cultures, of diets. Very close to what we're talking about today. And in itself, there's no problem with this world of diversity. That's just how the world is. Underneath that diversity, however, there is a very deep interconnectedness of all life. That's the wholeness that lies beneath the multiplicity, that interconnectedness that lies beneath this world of diversity. And the fundamental split, that fundamental dualism that we enact in order to see this diversity and in order to see our own difference from the environment, is that split between the subject and the object, which in the context of nature is the split between the human and the environment. We see ourselves as different from the environment, which, kept within moderation, is not necessarily a problem. But the problem arises when we take that split too far, and when our perception of diversity loses touch with that underlying interconnectedness of all life. And that's when we fall into fragmentation. And in the context of nature, in the context of what we're talking about, that fragmentation has, at least in part, taken place because of the impact of industrialization, modern agriculture, and we've lost touch with that interconnectedness behind this diversity of life forms. Ultimately, what we need to see is that nature really is a non-dual whole. There is interconnectedness, there is diversity, it's all part of the same process, and we're also absolutely embedded in that process. And our exploitation of nature and our abuse of nature takes place because we lose sight of that underlying wholeness, that underlying interconnectedness. Same pattern we see everywhere. We see the same pattern of fragmentation, losing touch with wholeness. We've seen it in physics, we've seen it in philosophy, we've seen it in science, we've seen it in spirituality, we see it now in nature. It's the root of most of what goes wrong. We fragment what was never meant to be fragmented. What has led to this fragmentation in this context, I suggest, is a greater and greater complexity in the way that we live. And that complexity has perhaps got out of beyond what is sane, beyond what is appropriate, out of control, and that has led to fragmentation. And what is required is some way of holding on to the complexity that we need, but in a way that is sustainable for the whole of life and for all of this diversity. So we need to find a way to heal this fragmentation by getting back in touch with that interconnectedness, with that diversity, but by not losing touch with that interconnectedness and falling into fragmentation. And I think that's the bigger context of everything that we're talking about at this conference. Now, one of the other uses of the Daimond model is it can help us to actually put together what we can call a diamond strategy. by pointing out all the different aspects that need to be taken into consideration if we want to find ways to heal and go beyond this fragmentation. You'll notice that there are 8 different points here, 8 different aspects of the Daimond model. And each of these 8 aspects points to some kind of principle that needs to be recognized. And each principle then points to some kind of action that needs to be taken. So let's see how that might pan out. Based on the Daimond model, we can generate an 8-fold sustainability plan. 1 principle, 1 action for each aspect or point in the Daimond model. First of all, wholeness. We need to embrace wholeness. We need to recognize and honor that interconnectedness of all life forms. We need to promote biodiversity conservation and ecosystem health through community-driven initiatives. That's the wholeness. We need to celebrate multiplicity. There's no problem in multiplicity if it doesn't become fragmentation. So we need to acknowledge and appreciate the diversity of these ecosystems, the diversity of our cultures. And how do we do that? Well, we support local and indigenous practices. We encourage sustainable agriculture, preservation of traditional knowledge. We have to address fragmentation, which is the real problem, the bottom end of the Daimond model, the far point of where our making things separate that shouldn't be separate, our loss of connection with interconnection, with the interconnectedness of nature goes wrong. And how do we address fragmentation? Well, one way we can do that is we have to understand the impacts that industrialization and modern agriculture have had on the environment. We need to advocate for policies that reduce habitat destruction and promote regenerative agricultural practices. And if you remember that first multiplicity that takes place in the middle of that diamond picture, the subject-object, we need to reframe the subject and object. We need to shift our human perception of nature away from exploitation to stewardship. We need to see that this object, what we see as an object of nature, has not been given to the subject to exploit, but to the subject to steward. So we need to foster education and awareness programs that highlight the importance of sustainable practices and get everyone to really see the value of nature, of which we're a part and which we need for our survival. We need to cultivate non-duality. We need to find ways to break down these perceived barriers between humans and the environment. We can encourage experiential learning, community gardening, nature immersion programs, so that we can encourage deepening connections with the natural world. And if you recall, the whole becomes the multiplicity through creation. The multiplicity recognizes wholeness again through evolution. Point 6 here would be to facilitate creation and evolution. How do we do that? We need to recognize the ongoing processes of ecological development and sustainability. So we need to invest in research, in innovation focused on sustainable technologies and practices that harmonize with natural systems. And a couple of final points. We need to integrate our ethical responsibility. When we truly see that Daimond model in nature, speaking poetically, when we see that diamond is a nature, that nature is a diamond of which we're a part, then we can come to acknowledge our ethical responsibility towards all living beings and to the planet. We need to promote ethical consumption. We need to encourage businesses to adopt practices that are sustainable, that are socially responsible. And finally, our final point, we need to encourage adaptive resilience. We have to build resilience in communities and ecosystems so that we can adapt to changing environmental conditions. We need to support local initiatives that enhance adaptive capacity through sustainable resource management and through community engagement. So what I've done there, I'm coming to the end of the presentation. What I've done there is I've shown what I believe is a fundamental structure of reality: wholeness, multiplicity, subject-object, fragmentation, non-duality. We've seen how this diamond shows up in all kinds of different contexts: science, Western philosophy, Eastern spiritual traditions. We've seen how the diamond shows up in nature. And using that diamond structure, that diamond perception in nature, we've been able to generate some idea of some of the things we need to actually do in order to play our part to enable that diamond quality of nature to really shine. And we can all play a part in that and actually have an ethical imperative to do that. Well, thank you very much for the presentation. If you want to be kept up to date with the kind of work we're doing, maybe we can send out these slides to people. Feel free to join our mailing list there.
Thank you so much. We appreciate you so much, Nish. Okay, now, are there any questions out there?
We have one question from the chat. This comes from Jonah Sauerberger. He says, "This is profound. Thank you so much. Can this diamond model and interconnectedness of all life also apply to realize all people are interconnected? Would we advance our cause more by acknowledging and appreciating that we are part of humanity and there is no us versus them?"
So did everybody hear that, or do I need to sum it up? It basically is a question about all people being one instead of an us versus them mentality. Can this diamond model also help people realize that we are all interconnected?
Yes, absolutely, because if you apply the diamond model to the human race, we can see the wholeness, which is humanity as a whole. We can see the multiplicity, which is the diversity within humanity, which in itself is not a problem. But when we fall into fragmentation, we lose sight of that wholeness. And then we split ourselves up needlessly into different races, castes, religions, so on. And these can then enter into conflict with one another because we've lost sight of that underlying wholeness. So yes, a great question. Within humanity itself, we can see that diamond at work. And again, the same imperative is there to find that underlying wholeness.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Nish. Yes, another question. Question coming in from the chat.
It's from Charlie Behrens. So-called regenerative agriculture does not have an agreed upon definition. It is a term often used to justify the continuation of animal agriculture. How do you reconcile the use of this term with your call for sustainable practice?
So the question is about regenerative agriculture, that there's really not a global definition on what that is. And how do you frame regenerative agriculture and explain it within your model?
Okay, thank you. Well, I mean, this isn't my area of expertise, so I won't pretend to be an expert in this. But again, I would say that the fundamental principle of the diamond model is wholes, parts, and fragments. So whatever problem we're dealing with, such as regenerative agriculture, sustainability, the job would be let's find out what is that underlying wholeness that we're coming out of, and that is the ground of our existence. Let's find out what is the legitimate diversity, the diversity that doesn't cause problems, and then let's find out how we've lost touch with that wholeness. That basic principle can be applied in all of these different contexts. So yes, I'll need to hand that over to people who have an expertise in that area. But that's the fundamental pattern that I believe can be applied to all of these different areas of inquiry.
Thank you. Another question?
Yeah, we have another one from Laura Beth. How when the entire education system is geared towards optimizing economic growth and not applying STEM to ensuring a livable, healthy planet and society? That understood, Nish?
This is about education. Can you repeat that question, please? I'm going to get it a little bit at a time. So can you?
How when the entire education system is geared towards optimizing economic growth.
So how, when the entire education system is geared towards optimizing economic growth,
STEM to ensuring a livable, healthy climate and society.
and not applying STEM to optimize a healthy, livable society? I hope that makes sense.
Sorry, would you mind repeating that again? Question again?
She used the word STEM.
STEM.
That's a science term for,
Science, technology, engineering.
stands for science and technology.
I'm not sure about this question. I don't know how to encapsulate it.
Vaughn,
Okay.
I have one from Michael. Question is, the way I see it, some of the main traditional and indigenous practices, or many in some cultures, involve animals. Could you speak to this, please?
Yeah, so the question mainly is about indigenous cultures and how they use animals. And can you please speak to this?
So, yeah, sure. So, one of the things that has been found in areas such as developmental psychology or cultural anthropology is that human beings do move through stages of development. And this has been laid out in some detail in various models such as spiral dynamics, integral theory, and so on. One of the things we find is that each new stage of development, as we develop, as we evolve as human beings, is able to transcend the previous stages, but also go back and include what is wise and right and valid from earlier stages. So a lot of the wisdom from the indigenous traditions has unfortunately been lost. There have also been maybe some things that have not been too desirable from some of the earlier traditions, which we've also dropped. As we evolve, and there's plenty of evidence for this in anthropology, one of the things that happens ideally is we find ways to go beyond what has gone before, but also to go back and take what is good and valid from what has gone before. And that's the process in which we will need to engage. So we don't simply go back and adopt wholesale previous traditions and previous practices. We find what is good and valid in those and add new things that we're finding that are good and valid. This would really need another talk because I would need to really go through these models of development. But that's really how we can understand that these kind of questions, to really study and look into the process of human development. But in short, yes, we'd need to go back and see what is it in previous cultures that has aligned with wholeness. What is it in previous cultures that has also been fragmented? Because fragmentation in some form has always been there. Mm-hmm. And we go back, we include those, and we're always, as we're evolving, moving towards higher and higher forms of wholeness. That's the ideal scenario, and that's the basic framework.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
One final question here, and then I know BJ has a question.
This is from Prado Mystery on Zoom. It says, this is fantastic philosophical and theoretical summary of the system on Earth. Are you able to work with local/central governments on policy development in the UK to apply this understanding?
Can we apply your state model for local and central government understanding in the UK?
Yes, I believe we can. In which context specifically was that question?
He wants to know what context.
Context. I'm not sure I'm getting what you mean by agriculture.
Agriculture.
Mm-hmm. So yes, I mean what we've found, because we've got a whole training school now working with this, what we've found is that the Daimond Model, and most essentially that those distinctions between wholeness, multiplicity, fragmentation, it's like a fractal that can be applied in all kinds of different scales. So if what we're looking at here in this context, say, is the local government initiatives in the UK in various contexts. I mean, I live in the UK. So what we would again have to do is look at the context, define the context, like I did in that last slide with nature. Nature was generally the context. Each application of the diamond is a context. We look at the context and we say, what is the whole here? What are the parts here? What are the fragments here? That's the first step. So we identify exactly where the fragmentation is actually occurring. Once we've found that, then we can put together an action plan for how to heal that fragmentation. And yes, that can be done in many areas. I'm actually in discussion with people at the moment on using that to understand what's going on in US government at the moment, for example. So yes, think of the diamond as a fractal that can be applied in different scales and in different contexts.
I see. Thank you so much. And BJ, you had a question?
Thank you very much. My question is, that's an eightfold plan that I'll need to hear again and think about. But you put that all in the positive. And I didn't understand what do you mean by increase our multiplicity? So maybe you could give me some examples of when we're not using multiplicity. And then you said duality, maybe some examples so that I understand a little better. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, so by multiplicity, I think what I said is we celebrate multiplicity. So multiplicity is not a problem in itself. The problem is when the multiplicity loses touch with that underlying wholeness. So we can celebrate the diversity of life on this planet. We can celebrate the different ecosystems. In different contexts, we can celebrate different races and different, the diversity of human beings. That's to be celebrated. The difference is not the problem. The problem is when we lose sight of the underlying oneness, then we fall into fragmentation. And I'm using the word duality there to suggest that there's always some kind of me versus you, us versus them, human versus nature, human versus environment, British versus French, whatever. There's always some kind of core duality that's at the root of the multiplicity and later the fragmentation. So when we put together some kind of diamond action plan, we go through each of these aspects of the model and we say what can be done to promote the good aspects of the model, the wholeness, the multiplicity, what can be done to heal or address the less desirable aspects of the model, the subject-object duality, the fragmentation, the too much complexity, and that's how we put together an action plan. But these are excellent questions. Some of these would need a lot of in-depth exploration to really work out how the diamond applies to these and work out action plans.
Yeah, I think these questions are designed to bring about a whole nother workshop from you.
Yeah, this is pretty much what we'll need, yes, because each of these, I think the diamond can certainly be applied, but we'd need a lot of time.
Fascinating. I would love to have a whole workshop, a whole day with you, Dr. Dubashia.
Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you so much.